just to check, I hope it's not insensitive culturally to talk about hamburgers. If so, let me rephrase that.
No, no, no. Don't worry
Okay,
about
edit that out. But I was just
it.
suddenly like, oh, hang on, yeah.
Hello, hello, my fellow geeks. Welcome to episode number 46 of the Indian AvGeek. My name is Vishal Mehra. Buckle up. Today's episode is flying at 38,000 feet of insight with a guest who knows more about lie-flat seats than most of us know about our own sofas. He is the editor-in-chief, or the voice behind the upfront, the sharpest take in the skies, and a global authority on all things premium cabins, passenger experience, and the subtle art of judging an airline by its seat map. Whether he's decoding the latest seat launch, calling out cabin faux pas, or live tweeting a transatlantic trip with the precision of an air traffic controller, he does it with wit, wisdom, and a window seat's perspective. Please welcome to the Indian AvGeek podcast, the one, the only, the seat whisperer himself, John Walton.
Thanks very much. It's a real pleasure to be with you.
John, you've been called the go-to voice on premium cabins. What first drew you to the world of airline interiors and passenger experience?
Well, that is very kind of you to say. And I really started off as a kid, right? So my parents worked for the United Nations when I was young. And so shuttling backwards and forwards from New York to the UK or wherever they were, it was the 80s, right? In the 90s, it was a time where you could go up to the flight deck and sort of hang out with the pilots. And there was enormous flight decks of those original 747-100 and 200s, right? The sort of three-person flight deck. And then on those sort of westbound day flights from London to New York, once those pilots got onto the North Atlantic tracks, they were only too happy to have an interested teenager asking questions about how it all worked. Right, it's something to do, something to occupy yourself with. And then I started getting really interested in how the logistics of it all worked, especially in the cabins. And then in my 20s, I started getting upgraded a few times because either I basically asked, or just an opportunity upgrade. And then I started blogging and tweeting about it, and was invited to become a journalist. And as I learned more and more about this incredible industry, including how it all fits together, it fascinated me then. It continues to fascinate me now.
How has the definition of luxury in the sky evolved over the last 2 decades, from flatbeds to studio suites that we see now?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's an interesting question, because one of the things that we look at the upfront is that line between luxury and premium, because I think a lot of airlines fail to understand what the difference is there. I think there's a point at which somewhere between premium economy and business, and quite a ways into business, people are expecting luxury now, even if they're not necessarily paying for it. So I think that a number of airlines do luxury really well in the premium segment. So, for example, you look at sort of the various offerings of premium economy out there, right? The British Airways premium economy, for example, is very standard, right? Like it's very average. But you look at Virgin Atlantic, who originally invented the one or two airlines to invent the concept back in the 90s. It's always had a certain bit of glam to it, right? Like you get presented with a glass of bubbles when you sit down, or there's a digestif tray that comes around, and all that is a flight attendant with a bottle of cognac and a bottle of Baileys on a little tray, and you can have a little snifter or something after your dinner. But it just feels a bit nicer, like one level up.
A slightly elevated experience, yes.
Yeah, exactly. And so you can sort of dip luxury down, but then when you start getting up to that difference in business classes, you can definitely see a number of business classes which are only premium, and I think I'd probably include Air India in that. Um, at least old Air India, right? Like Air India before a couple of years ago. Um, the airline is trying to sort of push more into that luxury phase in the business class side of things now. Um, but you also sort of, Emirates is in theory very luxurious, but as you know, and as your listeners will know, they still fly some of their ancient products into India. And
You
so
still
you
have
end
a
up with,
middle row.
yeah, 232 Slopey Sleepers, which is 1999 products, right? The first flatbed in business class came out in 2000. Right? This is not a modern product in any way.
The other issue I have with Emirates, and it's great that you have raised this point, is their first class product. They keep talking about the fully enclosed game changer suite, I think which made its public debut at the Dubai Air Show in 2017. We are now in mid 2025 and a total of nine Boeing 777s, 777-300ERs have it. And they have a fleet of 250 odd aircraft. And that's just mind boggling to me. It's almost criminal, but a tribute to their marketing team.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is what we in the aviation industry call a halo product, right? And so if we go back to our question about luxury, the halo product in 2005, Singapore Airlines suites, right? Emirates' first generation of A380 suites, right? All those generations of products. 10 years later, we're in the Etihad A380 suites and residence and apartments, right? Now, the luxury that we had in 2005, those first class seats are now a good business class seat, a strong business class, maybe that sort of studio class front row kind of product. I think that's one of the things that's really evolved, is that as first class has become more spacious, business class has sort of occupied the space that was first class, and is edging further into it, right, with these studio class front row business plus seats that we're seeing.
Which airline or seat launch in the last 5 years truly surprised you, John, and why?
Yeah, sure. I'll give you two there at sort of opposite ends of the spectrum. So I think one is Condor, which is a German leisure airline that was actually one of the first airlines to edge into studio class, right? So they were very much we're a bucket and spade seaside airline, and we do a little bit of long haul stuff out to holiday destinations in like the Caribbean or Mexico and so on. And then they
And
sort of
very
really,
interesting livery as well for Condor. The new
yeah, that sort of beach towel stripe. I mean, you definitely spot it, right? And as I said when it came out, like you can just see a little kid sort of pointing out the window and going, "Mummy, is that our plane?" It's those are the memories, right? And that's so smart in terms of branding. But in terms of their business class product, what they did is that they took the same product, the same base product that Emirates has on their A380s, right? The Saffron Sky Lounge staggered seat. And they sort of made it halfway businessy, and then they kept the stripes, but in a sort of muted palette. And I thought that was really clever. And they were one of the first ones to sort of look at this sort of front row business plus studio style as well. Really, really smart. And they leapfrogged Lufthansa, who are their sort of hometown, I mean, not even rival. Like Lufthansa is enormous and Condor is relatively small. And then the other one I think I'd talk about is the new ANA business class that they just launched at the Paris Air Show, which is the Room FX. And what's fascinating about this one, well, there's two things really. One is that they've managed to put an incredibly wide seat on a 787, which is actually quite a constrained narrow body. It's one of the smaller, constrained wide body. It's one of the smaller twin aisle aircraft there. And it's inspired by their previous generation of business class on the 777. So it brings in all the Kumakengo design, right? They had a Japanese designer to bring some of the best of Japanese luxury into it. But this seat, they've gone with the type of seat that doesn't recline. It basically is a sofa, and then a sort of leg rest comes up and meets you, which is great in terms of weight, complexity, maintenance, all that kind of thing. And I think I really enjoy that kind of seat. I've flown it a couple of times with Finnair because they also have that same sort of style of seat. And I think it's great. Some people prefer um, the sort of vampire class, as it were, where you sort of recline back downwards, and you sort of, when you time to go up, you sort of come back up as if you're Dracula. Um, but I'm perfectly fine with sort of slouching down into bed mode. The space that you get by not being constrained within a seat, and the amount of positions that you can take up, the amount of shoulder room. I was talking with journalist Seth Miller, who was at the Paris Air Show with me, and he's 5'10", which I guess is what in metric? Probably
That's
180 something.
178 centimeters.
Yeah. So he's a reasonable height, and he sleeps on his front normally. And this is one of the first seats in business class he's been able to actually sort of get his arms out in front of him and sleep on his front. And so I think that was great. I really thought ANA and their seatmaker Safran did a great job there.
Let's talk about the Indian market. You recently wrote about IndiGo's global ambitions and partnerships. What's your take on their premiumization strategy? A few weeks back, they've started their Mumbai-Manchester and Mumbai-Amsterdam flights as well.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. I think that there's a lot of scope there for IndiGo. And it depends how quickly they want to move up from being what was until very recently an all-economy low-cost carrier, right? So they actually started with Stretch, right, which is that sort of recliner-style seat on some A321neos. Those are very standard recliners, right? They're what you would see in US domestic first or international business class or global premium economy, right? Now, IndiGo basically has two options in terms of its premiumization strategy. So far, what it's done is it's added premium economy, international premium economy. So this was a recliner style seating. And that could either be where they end. They could say, actually, we're not going to get into the fully flat business class side of things. We just want this to be you can buy up to it, and that works with the North Atlantic aircraft that they're leasing, the 787s, right? Now, the question then is, okay, well, once you've established that, or in addition to that, you can create a business class offering. Right. And that really these days means a flatbed with direct aisle access for every passenger. And for most airlines these days, that means either a staggered seat, right, something like what Air India has, or a herringbone seat, which is something like what British Airways has, or that kind of thing. And so there are a couple of other options, but those are really your main bets. Once you've decided on that, you have to decide whether or not you put doors on. Now, doors are very heavy comparatively. Some people like them, some people don't. Most airlines seem to be taking them because that's what everyone else is taking. Some airlines are not. Some airlines are saying, actually, we don't think this really adds much, and we're going to do more with the design of the seats. So Finnair is a good example of that, right? And I think that sort of it comes true because that seat is very private even without a door. Turning back to IndiGo, if they wanted to go fully business class, as we've talked about, Emirates doesn't offer a massively great product into India. If you're connecting onwards from Dubai to premium markets, sure, that it can be pretty good. But in any case, there's no business class doors on Emirates, right? This is, it's the glitz and glam in Emirates is basically a bit of shiny wood and some sparkly brass, right?
Great marketing.
Yeah, great marketing. And it's for a certain aesthetic, right? And it's an aesthetic that's particular to a time and a place. And it's
very
not
loud. For some people, it might be very loud. For some people, it's great. So, yeah, I mean, there are two.
Yeah. For sure. It certainly doesn't feel like a modern luxury, right? It feels like a luxury from a different time. I was just on their new A350 at the Paris Air Show. And it's a lot of shiny fake surfaces. And again, there are definitely luxury cars that look like that. The most luxurious of luxury cars do not. Do with that as you will in terms of where Emirates' taste level is, something that is inherently subjective. Personally, I think Emirates' premium economy is the nicest product that they have. They've done a great job in making that look and feel luxurious without being over the top or bling bling or outre in any way. So in IndiGo terms, there's not a very high bar for IndiGo to have to clear here. If IndiGo were, for example, to say, we're going to offer a very solid business class seat, so something like a Thomson Vantage seat, right? So the sort of thing that Virgin Atlantic's A330s have, or a Collins Aerospace Elements Elevation Super Diamond Herringbone, like BA have. Whether or not they put doors on it, they would still be above quite a substantial bit of the market, mostly because Emirates doesn't fly direct all-access business class into a lot of its Indian destinations. Now, I encourage your listeners to read the piece, but that's a really interesting question. If they go for something more than a basic business class seat, not suite, that's going to tell you something about what their ambitions are, right? Their ambitions are much higher. If they don't take it, if they don't take a business class seat, they have options which essentially include going for a max pax, a maximum passenger version of their A350s, right? And you can see examples of that with French B, with Air Caraïbes, right? Like where you have very dense seats down the back with premium economy recliners up front. And so in IndiGo terms, that's just regular economy plus stretch in the front. And that's where you are. And I think that in terms of how that premiumization works, a lot of the proof and the pudding that needs to be there is about what happens at the end of the barbells of this new partnership with Delta KLM and brackets Virgin Atlantic over Manchester, right? Because what this is it's KLM plus IndiGo on the trunk between India and Europe, and then KLM and Delta plus a couple of Virgin Atlantic flights to North America. And on the Indian end of that is IndiGo. Now, if you're a premium traveler, so if you're looking for business class level of service, you're going to want some sort of premium experience at the airports in India, both on departure, on arrival, and on the plane. IndiGo doesn't really have an offering on that isn't stretch. Now, it could do something like a Euro business style product, right? So the business class in Europe is largely economy class seats with the middle seat free of the three, and you get a meal. And I can absolutely see a situation where IndiGo does something like you can have stretch if it's there, and if stretch isn't there, you get a Euro business style seat with all the usual business class luggage allowances, 2 pieces of 32 kilos, 2 pieces of hand luggage, et cetera, et cetera. I think that getting that right will be really important for IndiGo's premiumization.
Right. Some very interesting points there, John. You mentioned about setting a high bar and how Emirates isn't setting one, especially on J cabins out of India. Emirates might not be doing that, but then there are other airlines. There is Singapore Airlines, there is Qatar, there is ANA, there is Cathay, there is JAL, and even Etihad off late for that matter. There is intense competition, and it's not going to be easy for IndiGo or even Air India for that matter, right? They have to fight for every butt on that seat, especially in premium cabins. But if I have to ask you, what's your hunch as far as IndiGo's possible A350 product is concerned? What would your answer be? Do you think they can do with a recliner seat for their long-haul routes?
I think they can if they only want to sell it as a premium economy product. If they're going to sell it as business, I don't think that's going to work. I think that India is too mature a social media market for people to be hoodwinked by an airline presenting recliner seats as business class, right? Like people have the internet in their pocket. and they've seen influencers, if they have the modicum of interest in flying business class, in what actual business class is like, right? Or the influencers always big it up, right? But people have eyes. You can't, sell people business class and give them a recliner these days on long haul flights. If they're selling business, my hunch is if they go big with business class, that means they have big aspirations. They could go mid on business class, or they could go not at all.
Well, they have 60. They have 60 A350s on order. So
Yeah.
I would classify that as fairly, sizable ambition.
Yeah, ambition-wise, yes, but I think the question is what they put on those aircraft is going to be really interesting in terms of the onboard products.
IndiGo will be flying A350s to Australia, Japan, major European cities, and possibly North America as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. But I guess my question is, the market that they have to win is relatively, I don't want to say it's relatively uncompetitive, but in many ways it is relatively uncompetitive, largely because of Air India's ongoing pre-AI 171 issues.
The troubles,
right?
Yeah.
And by that I largely mean around sort of passenger experience consistency, right? I mean, it's the sort of the two types of A350 business class they're going to have. The 777-200LRs, which they had the old original Air India version, now they have the X-Delta version. The three variants of 777-300ERs.
Yeah.
The multiple.
Hold on a second. Hold that thought for Air India, John. We will come back to it, but let's finish talking about IndiGo. I had the COO of Sky team a few weeks back on the show, and I was asking him what does he think of IndiGo joining the alliance. He said something to the tune of, if they want to join in, they're welcome. I think with all the announcements we have seen during the IATA AGM week, with IndiGo announcing partnerships with Delta, Virgin Atlantic, Air France, KLM, half of their foot is already in the alliance, though it remains to be seen if IndiGo actually sees the value of being in an alliance formally or not. Do you see IndiGo joining the alliance?
Yeah, I would. I think India is in a strong place with the potential Sky Team alliance. Look, they're now in bed with Delta, KLM, Virgin. They signed with Garuda. This is very strong Sky Team alignment.
Air
even
France
before
as well, yeah.
Yeah, right. Like, if you're in with KLM, you're in with Air France. Let's not forget that the CEO is Peter Elbers, right, the former CEO of KLM. And yeah, I think Sky Team would be, I don't want to say a foregone conclusion at this point, but it is definitely a logical conclusion to what they've been going on.
Let's talk about Air India. Air India's existing J-class seat, the Collins Horizon Premier, originally ordered by Aeroflot. You've spoken to the team behind the seat. What's your take on it?
Yeah, so I love the seat, right? I loved the seat when I first saw it on Aeroflot. It was the last aviation event that I attended before COVID lockdown, in 28th of February 2020. So I think that as a seat, it's great. It's a very strong, staggered seat, good doors. The aesthetic, I think, I would say, is not up to modernity. It's those waves don't seem modern to me. But with everything that Air India could have done to that, they've done. It looks like a very enjoyable product. I know a few people who've flown it as the Air India version. They like it a lot. And I think that's very strong. I've spoken to the Collins people about it. I'm quite surprised that more airlines have not taken the Collins Horizon Premier as a seat, because it's a great product. Genuinely, in terms of how products go, it's one of the best out there.
There are unfortunately lots of questions around Air India currently, but we will continue to focus on the passenger experience side for this discussion. There are questions around the state of the deal for their future business class seat, the Saffron Seats Unity product. You've been to the factory as well, as I understand. What's your take on the situation?
Yeah, I have. They make those in a little town in South Wales called Cwmbran, which is a couple of hours west of London, just over the border into Wales. And it's Unity is a good seat. Saffron has run into a number of problems in terms of their production quality. So in terms of the reliability of the seats, the way that the bits fit together, just the sort of assembly process. But yeah, so it was a positively noteworthy event where India said, "Oh, we're going to take Unity," right? That puts them alongside airlines like Japan Airlines, Qantas, Korean Air. I think chose it after Air India, if memory serves. But I've heard mumblings, and I wouldn't characterize them as anything more than mumblings about that deal being in question now. And nobody has really given me a good answer. But when I asked Saffron, they said, go talk to the airline. And that was the day before the unfortunate events in Ahmedabad, right? So understandably, I did not pursue it with Air India. I would not expect Air India's comms teams to be replying to me on this level of question at this point. I would have expected, if there were no issues with the deal, with Saffron's come back to me with a response like, no, what are you talking about? That deal is going ahead. We're expecting to deliver the first ship sets in date, or something like that. So my reservations are not quashed, but nor are they confirmed in any way. This is going to be something I'm going to watch, obviously. But yeah, I think that's about as much as I or frankly anybody else can say about that at this point.
And Air India's upcoming first class, probably to be launched on the 777X. Nobody knows when the aircraft actually will arrive or enter into service with Air India. But what do you think? What do you think about the proposed product?
If I were running Air India, I would not offer a first class product, frankly. I would instead concentrate much more on some sort of business plus suite, a studio class product. I just don't think that the future fleet that they have, that would be where I would concentrate my energy in terms of everything from service design to the need to maintain them. Yeah, I think to an extent in terms of operating as a modern airline that is up to standard in things like the IFE working, the seats looking good, the consistency in service, expanding things like beyond ground experience. I worry that for Air India, first class is a distraction and one that they do not have the capacity to fully engage with.
Well, Air India's management has affirmed a clear and ongoing commitment to offering a first class product in the future, particularly on select wide body aircraft and premium international routes. So you'll have Delhi London or Delhi JFK. I was reading what Nipun Agarwal, Air India's chief commercial officer, was saying a few weeks back. He said first class continues to be seen as an aspirational product, and that helps define the airline's premium image and ability to compete with the world's best carriers. So that is their official take on things.
Yeah, I mean, what I'd say to that is, you're familiar with Popeye the cartoon and the character J. Wellington Wimpy, who will gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today. I feel like Air India needs to serve its burger today rather than trying to pretend that it's going to be they're putting something in place for the future when they're going to be able to take advantage of it. No, if that's the case, you can easily retrofit the front of the cabin, take a couple of seats out. There are so many warning stories of airlines who've tried to run before they're walking with product. And I worry that this is the same case.
Let's move to the west of India. Emirates was recently in the news, as they always are, talking about a possibly new economy seat. Tim Clark was talking to Richard Quest and said something to the tune of, maybe there is some potential in making the height of the seats, longer to give increased comfort to customers, especially on long haul routes. Clark said that significant improvements are in development and being tested, with a public reveal likely within the next 18 months. Also clarified that while the new seat will not be groundbreaking in the sense of dramatic transformation, a chair is a chair, as he put it, the improvements will be meaningful, focusing on comfort, design, technology, as you'd expect him to say. What's your take on it, John? And do you see something like that getting certified?
It's hard to think to imagine something myself that somebody else is also imagining without a huge amount of detail, and then say, well, the certification implications of this imagination by someone else that I'm also imagining are this. So let me talk sort of generally in terms of seat height and see if that walks around answering your question in a helpful way. Essentially, the barrier to higher seats in economy are around safety, in terms of crash safety. So for most economy seats, that means the movement of you, the passenger, as measured by the crash test dummy during testing, largely forwards and what your head is going to hit. We had a lot of trouble in recent years, last 5 years or so, around what's called shatter, which was as the size of in-flight entertainment screens increased, as they stopped being that sort of matte, old school touchscreen surface and became glossy and looked like a phone or a laptop, the I'll say the interaction between head and screen, basically, when the dummy head smacked the screen, it shattered, right? We've now basically fixed that with films and construction and placement of the screen. Opening up the shatter question again by saying, well, how about you move those screens higher? That's a big question for me. And it's a question that I wouldn't want to try to ask. That said, if there's anyone who's going to try to ask it, it's Emirates, right? I mean, they have a massive global fleet. However, the counterpoint to that is Emirates is already among market-leading business classes. Market-leading economy classes, right? In in-flight entertainment, food, honestly, in terms of space these days, right? And yes, a lot of what they fly into India is elderly, but a lot of what they fly elsewhere is excellent. I sat down in the A350 seats at the Paris Air Show, and I was genuinely really impressed. I don't care for this sort of like watery desert aesthetic that they have, but that's very much a personal preference. In terms of the basics of the seat, it's great. I don't see why Emirates, the incumbent the incumbent here, right, would need to be making that move, rather than someone like Etihad or Qatar, who are the challenger airlines, or one of the new Saudi airlines, for example, being the ones looking at that. The other thing, in addition to the head impact that you have to look at, is what's called cabin view. So the flight attendants need to be able to see all the passengers. Now, I think Tim Clark addressed this by saying, well, there's cameras everywhere. I would not want to be the airline that had to persuade regulators that that was going to be fine. Especially regulators which are already looking quite skeptically at emergency egress. You might have noted that a number of recent business class seats have caused delays because there's a question about doors in business class, and the US FAA wants to reopen questions about emergency egress from doors. And that's fair enough, right? Because I think originally people didn't give enough attention to that, and it's fair enough to talk about it. So going back to Emirates, I can see that there's somebody could do that. I don't know why you would want it to be Emirates.
You were at Paris Air Show a few weeks back. Any interesting takeaways for you from the event? Admittedly, much more subdued and muted due to the recent tragedy, of course.
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, it was very much a muted event, a subdued event, as you said. One of my takeaways was just how touched and how much concern was being shown by everybody in the industry. You had the Boeing team, they shut down their media events, but everybody was walking around with an Air India pin as a mark of respect. The few press conferences that were going on outside Boeing, they all started with acknowledgement and condolences. As much as many of these companies are very strong rivals, both the airframers and the airlines, there's an acknowledgement that, we are all one industry and in many ways one family. And then the other thing that really struck me at the Paris Air Show was just how full order books are right now, and just how little capacity there is to order new aircraft. So, for example, if you want anything that is not an A220 or an A330neo, you are looking to 6 or 7 years from now, right? Which is early to mid 2030s, best case, right? If you place a large order, there you can probably slide you in somewhere, right? But only for a couple of aircrafts. And I think in that context, you start running into things like the piece that actually we just wrote this morning, or published this morning anyway. I wish I could write 2,500 words in a morning, about looking at the growing importance of retrofits.
I'm going to come to that. I'm going to come to that,
Yeah.
John, on the next question. I'm going to come to that specifically on that. But yeah, overall, what were the trends that you saw? So of course, a great amount of demand.
Yeah. So obviously there's been so much demand previously that very few airframers have the ability to do big deals like they have in the past, right? So a lot of it, what they can do now is execute on previous options, as IndiGo did at the IATA summit in Delhi, or as Starlux did in Paris. Other than that, this was a very quiet show, and it was always going to be a quiet show even before Air India 171. And it will be interesting to see what deals were quietly done at the show in terms of looking forwards in the industry. But beyond that, it was a defense year really at the air show, in the context of global conflicts, of regional conflicts, which you at the Indian AvGeek will be all too familiar with. I think that certainly subdues a mood and concentrates minds on things that are not buying commercial aircraft.
On the deals done silently during the Paris Air Show, my bet is on IndiGo and ATR. Not announced yet due to obvious reasons, but I guess we will hear about it sooner than later. I want to talk about your recently launched publication, The Upfront. Many congratulations on that, John. I read this fantastic detailed piece on it about wide body retrofits, mainly due to supply chain and production issues. One of the points that stood out for me in the piece was how late model 777-300ERs can be upgraded to something approaching the width and space benefits of the new wider 777X cabin, and how the A330 CEOs, the classic engine options, might go part of the way to match the A330neo's airspace cabins. And there's a real opportunity there for airframers seeking to expand their service portfolios, right? But also for the MRO operators and suppliers with upgrade option programs. I guess somebody's misery is another man's opportunity. Is there a silver lining to all of this?
So I think if there is a silver lining to the order book situation, it is for MRO operators, that's maintenance, repair, and overhaul, and people who are making cabin retrofits. Absolutely. So I mean, yeah, it's very much a question at this point of if, and if so, how in terms of these retrofits. So examples that have been used before include mostly narrow body aircraft, right? So it's elderly narrow bodies operated by, for example, Delta in the US, right? So old 757s, old Airbus A320 family, including 319s that were, previously operated by Northwest. Some of the first A319s in the US, for example. And essentially, they've just gutted the entire aircraft and replaced everything, like new, bigger bins, more modern overhead control panels, of course, new seats, new sidewall panels, new carpet, everything like that. And unless you're, somebody who's extremely in the weeds on this, like me and you, right? Most passengers will be very hard pressed to look at a factory fresh A321neo and one of these upgraded A320 family aircraft by Delta and say, oh, that one's definitely the new one, right? So what I was thinking about in the piece was how does that translate into wide bodies? Now, part of that is obviously around the extra width that comes from the transition from the 777-300ER generation, right? That sort of early 2000s generation, into the 777X generation, right? So part of what Boeing has changed there is the internal shape and internal thickness of the bit between cabin sidewall and the external fuselage, right? And that's moving insulation around, moving wiring around, et cetera, et cetera. Now, you're not going to be able to do everything there with an old 777-300ER, like move wiring. That would be foolishness. But can you get halfway there, right? Like, can you add a couple of inches to each side, which enables a bit more space, a bit more comfort? Can you, for example, add something in the front cabins where some airlines took wide body aircraft without bins in the center? Can you do something like what Boeing is now offering, which is having small bins in the center, which still mean that you're not fighting with the person on the outboard for who owns this bin, right? Which is one of the business class dramas of our times. Can you do something like that, right? Can you do something around getting halfway to some of these new entryways that the airframers are proposing? And same with getting from A330ceo to A330neo kind of interiors. So yeah, if you're interested in this stuff, that's what we talk about all the time on the Upfront. For sure. Visit us at theupfront.media, and you can subscribe for all of our pieces, or roughly half of them are available free to read.
According to you, John, which is the most underrated airline seat you've flown? And one airline you think is quietly doing amazing work on passenger experience?
I think the one I would pick would be the first generation Singapore Airlines suite on the A380 from the early 2000s, right? Had that nice big wide armchair, right? Which sort of did a nice sort of lazy Z reclining for a lovely afternoon watching things, sipping nice, delicious beverages and enjoying some great food. And then it had this bed that sort of swung down forwards from the wall, which was just so comfortable, and it was very well padded. And then they transitioned to their current product, which I do not care for at all. It has this sort of very small, cramped, sort of meeting room chair sort of thing, and then a very uncomfortable, unpadded, thin, narrow bunk that comes out of the side of the wall. I just think it's a downgrade, frankly. I mean, yeah, big higher walls feels a little bit more private. I don't necessarily think that the other one didn't feel private, to be honest. So yeah, I think that's one. I mean, you can't fly it anymore, unfortunately, because the Singapore has completed their refit. But yeah, I hope those seats are happily ensconced with some collectors somewhere for sure. I think in terms of an airline doing amazing work, I keep coming back to Finnair. They're always one to watch in terms of passenger experience as a relatively small, relatively nimble airline that knows its niche really well. They're very agile when it comes to changes, right? I mean, you saw the way that with the lack of overflying Russia, it became, immediately they had to change their entire network strategy, right? Their network strategy was connecting Europe to Asia over Helsinki. And you can't do that without Russia overflight. They have a very strong product right now, right? That their new business class seat, the sofa style that we mentioned earlier, is really good. And they're not afraid to take risks. And I think that's really admirable as an airline. So yeah, they're doing amazing work.
You have covered a wave of new seat launches in 2025, from Cathay's Area Suite to Lufthansa's Allegris. Which of these do you think will set the tone for the next decade of premium travel?
I think it's United's new Polaris for a number of reasons. So the United's new Polaris is the Elevate Ascent seat. Elevate is the new name for Adient Aerospace, which is a joint venture partnership with Boeing and Adient, the automotive seat maker. It's at its base, it's a solid product. It's a good herringbone. But United has gone a step further than previous operators, including Qatar, including Hawaiian, did. So it's all suites, and they are doing a hybrid layout. And what that means is all window seats point towards the aisle. I'm sorry, all window seats point towards the window. The center seats in the front point away from the aisle, so towards the center line of the aircraft, right? So they point together, right? Once you're back in the second cabin, the center line seats point away from each other with their toes towards the aisle, right? So what that means is if you're flying in a pair, right, with a friend or a partner, you want to be in that second cabin because you have essentially the sort of top half of a double bed once you get into that recline position, which is great. Now, for various very technical reasons around the shape of aircraft cabins, it makes much more sense if you have that front cabin only to go one where the toes are together, not the heads are together, just in terms of how you fit them in the front of the aircraft. But United has really taken advantage of that by now offering multiple different types of studio class, right? So they've got one type by the windows, one type in the front cabin, and one type in the second business class cabin. And I think that can be really interesting when it comes to selling different types of business class, experimenting around, well, what do people really want in this studio class? Studio class is the big trend right now, absolutely up the front of the plane. And yeah, so I covered the United piece in quite some depth on the upfront when we launched. So yeah, encourage readers to go and have a look there for sure. If there's anything that you want to look at in our subscriber section for pros, happy to give out a code for a free trial. Try podcast 20p as your discount code for signing up with us. But yeah, that I think is going to be one of those business classes that in a few years back we say actually that really changed the game in terms of look and feel, in terms of the materials they use, in terms of the aesthetic, that really shows what you can do with these modern products.
Finally, if you could redesign one element of the flying experience, what would it be? So
it would be the flying experience for disabled passengers, people with reduced mobility, and folks with additional needs, elderly passengers, parents traveling with children. By and large, too much of the aviation passenger experience has been built on the assumption that people are entirely abled and entirely mobile. That is simply not the case for any of us, right? Whether or not you have a disability, a permanent disability, or a temporary disability, right? Have you broken your leg? Have you fractured your wrist, right? Any number of those things means that you need certain accommodations from your airline, right? Historically, you've been able to ask for three things: a wheelchair to the gate, a wheelchair onto the plane, or a wheelchair to your seat, right? And that's largely been it. And that just doesn't encompass the range of people flying and what they need, right? I flew my 82-year-old mother, who is now, she reminds me, 83. No, she's now 84 this year, actually, to Japan at the end of last year. And so she flew from the UK, and we paid a little bit more than a connecting flight to have her go nonstop on ANA. And I can't say enough about how well ANA took care of her. That said, I think that one of the things that any sort of passenger who needs a little bit of extra help and assistance is automatically just funneled into you need a wheelchair, right? And then what happens is quite often, okay, well you're in a wheelchair, off you go to the wheelchair corral, right? Where you must sit in your wheelchair until we come and get you, and we take you to the gate, and then we'll roll you onto the plane. And but actually, there's so much of the passenger experience that denies people who either need a wheelchair, or even more astoundingly, don't actually need a wheelchair. They just need some assistance getting through an enormously complicated airport, or on a difficult connection or a tight connection. And I think that offering a wider range of accommodations for adaptations to the passenger experience, whether that's the ability for somebody to say, I am able to walk, I don't know, 500 meters, but not 5 kilometers, right? That would be something that could usefully be done to change the passenger experience, right? I'm always reminded of when my parents, they flew down to visit me from, I was staying on Gran Canaria for a few weeks, and they came down for part of that. And that was a simple, flying from Birmingham in the UK down to Gran Canaria. And my mum's iPhone reported that she had walked 5 kilometers, right? Now, that's astounding to me, given that she got on one 737 and got off one 737 at what are really small to medium-sized airports. Okay, I don't think we should assume that everybody can do a 5K. And if we are making those assumptions, I think that A, that's just morally wrong, and B, that's leaving a lot of potential passengers on the table, right? And for airlines, I think this may well be particularly true for your listeners. I think there's a lot of VFR, visiting friends and relative traffic, to India, including a lot of older family members who are often shunted into that wheelchair category because that's the only way that you can get someone to help them through an airport where they may not speak the language, right? If you're connecting through Frankfurt and you don't speak German, for example, good luck, because that airport is enormous, and I can understand why people would book a wheelchair for that, but they shouldn't have to, right? There should be an option, for example, for a non-walking transfer, right? Now, whether that involves coming in with something like the catering truck for people who cannot do a 5, 6, 7 kilometer walk through Frankfurt Airport, or what. I do think that more needs to be done in terms of offering adapted experiences to people who need it.
And on that note, I have to thank you for your time, John. It's been lovely chatting and learning from you. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. That's one of the reasons why my business partner, Gareth Edwards, and I started the Upfront, is that we want to take the knowledge of the industry and share it more widely, because it is fascinating, this industry. So yeah, please do check us out, theupfront.media. You can have a discount on a pro subscription using the code podcast20p. And we look forward to seeing you there or in the skies.
Brilliant speaking with John and getting a bird's eye view on all things passenger experience. Next Sunday, it's the return of the Indian AvGeek, and we will have one of the most exciting young leaders in Indian advertising. As usual, don't forget to subscribe and share this episode of the Indian AvGeek with your fellow AvGeeks. John is at that John, and I am at Vishal One Mehra on X. Always happy to have your feedback. With that, keep your tray tables up, your seatbelts fastened. I wish you well and happy flying, my friends.